You'd bring her to this table?
A schoolteacher with nothing but a satchel and a rented room?
The words hit the dining room like a cast-iron skillet dropped on stone.
Cole Madron didn't flinch. He stood at the head of that long oak table with his hat in his hands and his jaw set, and he looked his father-in-law straight in the eye and said, "That's exactly what I'd do." Outside, the Texas wind was working itself into something mean.
It came off the Llano Estacado flat and purposeful,
The kind of wind that didn't bend around anything.
it just pushed through. The sky above Calloway Creek had gone the color of old brass, and the cottonwoods along the creek bed were throwing their leaves sideways.
Inside the Vantorp house, nobody was looking at the weather. Nell Vantorp had arrived in Calloway Creek 11 months earlier with a trunk, a box of school books, and a letter of employment from the County Board of Education. She was 26 years old, brown-eyed, and had the kind of quiet that people sometimes mistook for shyness until she opened her mouth and said exactly what she meant. The town had a school that hadn't had a proper teacher in 2 years. The last one had married a cattle buyer from Abilene and left in the spring without much notice. Before that, the position had turned over 3 times in 4 years. Calloway Creek was not by any measure an easy posting.
Nell had taken it anyway.
She boarded with Dora Hicks, a widow who kept chickens and strong coffee and didn't ask unnecessary questions. The schoolhouse was a single room with warped floorboards and windows that let in the cold in January, but Nell had caulked the gaps herself and built the morning fire herself, and by October she had 14 students who showed up on time, which was more than the county board had managed in years. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just doing the work. Cole Madron had first spoken to her in September in the dry goods store, when they had both reached for the same tin of baking powder at the same moment. He was tall and had the particular kind of weathered look that came from working outdoors his entire life.
Not rough exactly, but used, in the way good tools get used. He'd apologized, handed her the tin, and that was the end of it. Except it wasn't.
He came by the schoolhouse the following week with a wagon load of split wood, said the town had always kept the school supplied and he'd just gotten around to it late. Nell thanked him. He stacked the wood himself. He left without asking for anything. The week after that, he stopped to fix a hinge on the schoolhouse door that had been sticking since August. She hadn't asked him to. He'd simply noticed it on his way past and come back with tools. That was Cole Madron. He didn't make speeches. He just showed up. By November, they were talking most evenings when he rode through town. By December, he had asked if he could call on her properly, and she had said yes, and Dora Hicks had smiled into her coffee cup and not said a word. The trouble had a name, Georgiana Vantorp. She was 24 and the only daughter of Harbert Vantorp, who owned the Vantorp Mercantile, the Vantorp Grain and Feed, and a controlling stake in 2 of the 4 businesses that made up the commercial center of Calloway Creek. He was not the mayor, but he didn't need to be. He was the kind of man who made decisions in back rooms and had them show up as town policy 3 weeks later. Georgiana had known Cole since they were children.
She was beautiful in a calculated way.
She knew which dresses photographed well and how to position herself in a room, so she was always slightly above eye level. She had never been unkind to Nell directly. She had simply acted, from the beginning, as though Nell were a temporary fixture. The way you might acknowledge a traveling medicine show, present for now, gone by spring. When Cole made it known that he was serious about Nell, Harbert Vantorp called a dinner. It was framed as a social occasion. An invitation to the Vantorp house on a Friday evening, the kind of invitation that couldn't be refused without creating talk. Cole brought Nell because he wasn't going to go without her, and Nell wore her good dress, the dark green wool one, and kept her chin level the entire drive over. The Vantorp house was the largest in Calloway Creek. It had a parlor with wallpaper imported from back east and a dining table that seated 12.
That evening there were 8 of them. Harbert at the head, his wife Constance at the other end, Georgiana to Harbert's right, Cole and Nell across from her, and 3 men from the county, whose names Nell learned and promptly categorized as Harbert's audience. The food was good, the conversation was careful. And then, over the dessert course, Harbert had set down his fork and looked at Cole with the patient expression of a man who believes he already knows how things will go. "I'll be direct," he said. "It's time you settle down, Cole. You've got the Madron land, you've got a good name, and you've got prospects.
What you need is the right partner." Cole had looked at him steadily. "I've found her." Harbert's eyes moved to Nell with a particular kind of assessment that had nothing to do with respect.
"A schoolteacher," he said. "From where, exactly?" "San Angelo,"
Nell said.
She hadn't been spoken to directly, but she answered anyway. Harbert turned back to Cole. "Your father and I had an understanding. My father's been dead 3 years. The understanding doesn't expire." The table went quiet. Georgiana looked at her dessert plate. Constance looked at the wall.
Cole set his napkin on the table and said, "With respect, Harbert,
I didn't come to dinner to be told who I'm marrying. That was when Harbert said it, leaned forward, voice dropping the performance of civility. You'd bring her to this table? A schoolteacher with nothing but a satchel and a rented room. And Cole said, that's exactly what I'd do. They left before the pie was served. On the drive back through town, Cole didn't speak right away. The wind had picked up. The lantern on the wagon swung. Nell sat with her hands in her lap and waited. I'm sorry about that, he said finally. Don't be, she said. You didn't do anything wrong. He's going to make things difficult. He already is. She looked at the dark road ahead. I've had difficult before. It doesn't scare me. He reached across and took her hand, and she let him. Harbert Vanthorpe was, as promised, efficient about making things difficult. Within a week, 2 of the school board members, both of whom did business with the Vanthorpe Mercantile, were asking quiet questions about Nell's qualifications. Nothing direct. Just questions. The kind that float in the air and make people uncertain without giving them anything specific to push back against. One of the parents pulled her son from school. No explanation given. The livery stopped letting Nell hire a horse on her usual arrangement. Cash only now, they said. Sorry, ma'am. It was the texture of exclusion. Not any one thing large enough to confront, but 100 small things that added up to a message. You don't belong here, and we can make that true. Nell kept teaching. She got up every morning, built the fire, and taught 13 students instead of 14. She didn't complain to Cole because she knew he would go to Harbert and make it worse. She didn't complain to Dora Hicks because Dora had her own rent to worry about, and the Vanthorpe family held notes on half the town. She wrote letters in the evening. She graded papers. She kept going. What she didn't expect was Georgiana. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning, during the noon recess, when most of the children had gone outside. Nell was at the chalkboard erasing the morning's arithmetic when the door opened and Georgiana Vanthorpe came in, alone, without her usual composure fully assembled. She looked like she hadn't slept. Miss Vanthorpe, Nell said carefully, I need to talk to you. Georgiana looked around at the empty room as if confirming they were alone. Not about what you think. Nell put down her eraser. All right. Georgiana sat in the front row chair as if her legs had simply stopped cooperating. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. He's going to push until Cole breaks or you leave, she said. That's how he works. He doesn't fight clean. He just keeps applying pressure until things bend. Nell said nothing. She waited. I have been letting him do this my entire life. Georgiana's voice didn't tremble, but it had something held down inside it. He decides what I wear and who I sit next to at dinner, and which men I'm allowed to find interesting. He told me Cole Madron was going to be my husband when I was 17 years old. Nobody asked me. Did you want that? Nell asked. Georgiana looked up. Something in her face shifted. I wanted someone to ask me. That's all I've ever wanted. Just for someone to ask. The silence between them was different now. Not comfortable exactly, but honest. He's been going through my correspondence, Georgiana said. I've been writing to a man in Tucson. His name is Howard Crane. He's a telegraph operator. He's kind and he makes me laugh, and my father has never met him, and I want to keep it that way. She looked at her hands. If my father destroys you, there's no one left who might say to him that he can't keep doing this. I don't understand what you're asking, Nell said, though she was beginning to. I'm asking you not to leave. Georgiana raised her eyes. And I'm telling you that there are things my father has done, with the grain contracts, with the water allocation on the south parcels, that the county assessor would be very interested to know about. I have the ledger pages. I've had them for 2 years. Nell stood very still. I didn't do anything with them, Georgiana said, because I was afraid, because he's my father and I didn't want to. She stopped. Started again. I'm still afraid, but I'm more afraid of becoming someone who just lets things happen to her and calls it life. Cole found out the same evening. Nell told him everything, sitting at Dora's kitchen table with the lamp between them. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, She came to you. She came to me. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. What do you want to do? And that question, asked without assumption, without him deciding in advance what the right answer was, that was the moment Nell understood, fully and completely, that she was going to marry this man. I want to take it to Judge Henshaw, she said. Not to destroy Harbert. To stop him. There's a difference. Cole nodded slowly. There is, and Georgiana needs to be the one to bring it. It has to come from her. She agreed to that? She suggested it. The meeting with Judge Clarence Henshaw happened on a Thursday morning. Georgiana brought the ledger pages in a cotton bag she'd borrowed from the kitchen. Her hands shook slightly when she set them on the judge's desk, but her voice did not. Harbert Vanthorpe arrived at the courthouse 40 minutes later, having been summoned by a deputy, and found his daughter sitting across from the judge with a woman he had tried to drive out of town and a cowboy he had underestimated. He looked at Georgiana first. The look on his face was not anger, exactly.
It was the particular expression of a man who has just discovered that the world does not obey him the way he expected.
Georgiana, he said, what have you done? It wasn't a question. It was a warning, dressed up as one.
Georgiana said, I stopped waiting for someone else to do it. The following weeks were not easy. They were not supposed to be. The county assessor opened an inquiry into the grain contract irregularities. The water allocation on the south parcels was re-examined. Two of the school board members who had been asking quiet questions about Nell's credentials suddenly stopped asking them because they had their own books they would prefer not to have examined. Harbert Vanthorpe did not go quietly. He hired an attorney from Abilene. He made phone calls. He wrote letters. He told anyone who would listen that his daughter had been manipulated, that the school teacher was a troublemaker, that Cole Madron had always been unstable. Nobody listened the way they once would have. It turned out that many people in Calloway Creek had been waiting for a reason not to. Constance Vanthorpe came to see Nell 2 weeks after the courthouse meeting. She was a small, careful woman who had spent 26 years perfecting the art of being invisible in her own home. She sat in Dora's parlor and held her tea with both hands and said, I want you to know I'm not here to apologize for him. He wouldn't think he needs it. All right, Nell said. I want you to know that I see what you did.
Constance looked at her steadily. What you both did. What Georgiana did. Her voice caught slightly. She's my daughter. I didn't protect her the way I should have. Nell sat with that.
Didn't minimize it or rush past it. She protected herself, she said finally. You can start from here. Constance left without much more. But she came back 3 days later and asked if she could help with something, anything, and Nell handed her a stack of papers to sort and put her to work. Cole Madron and Nell Vanthorpe. She kept her name professionally. The students were used to it. Were married in April, when the mesquite was finally greening and the wind had gentled into something almost agreeable. It was a small wedding. The schoolhouse after hours with the desks pushed to the walls. Dora Hicks made the cake. Judge Henshaw presided. 14 students and their parents filled the room. Georgiana was there in the front row. She had a letter in her coat pocket from Howard Crane in Tucson, who was planning to visit in June. She was nervous about it in a way that felt entirely different from every other kind of nervous she had known. Lighter, somehow, like something that had been held down was being allowed slowly to surface. She watched Cole take Nell's hand and say the words, and she felt something settle in her chest. Not grief for what hadn't happened between herself and Cole. She'd known for years there was nothing real there, only her father's ambition wearing the shape of a future. What she felt was something closer to relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop pretending a room is safe and simply walk out of it. The following autumn, Nell's classroom had 16 students. The warped floorboards had been replaced over the summer. Cole and 3 other men from town had done it in a weekend, and the windows no longer let in the cold. She was 4 months pregnant, though she hadn't told the school board yet.
She figured they'd notice eventually and deal with it.
Harbert Vanthorpe had reached an agreement with the county assessor that involved repayment, oversight, and a significant reduction in his ability to quietly influence town policy. He had not spoken to Georgiana since the courthouse.
Nell didn't know if he ever would. That wasn't her part to manage.
What was her part? 14-year-old Maisie Connell, who had started the year barely able to read and was now getting through whole chapters without stopping. 8-year-old twins who fought constantly but were secretly teaching each other multiplication tables. A boy named Ezra who drew pictures in the margins of everything and had a gift that deserved more than a small Texas town. Nell was already writing letters about that. She stood at the window in the late afternoon after the students had gone and looked out at the creek bed and the cottonwoods and the sky going pink and orange above the flat land. Cole was coming down the road. She could see the dust from his horse before she could see him clearly, but she knew the way he rode, the particular unhurried way he sat a saddle, like he had nowhere to be that mattered more than where he was. She pressed one hand flat against her middle, where something was already beginning to make itself known. She thought about Georgiana writing letters in secret, about constant sorting papers in Dora's parlor with the careful efficiency of a woman learning, late, what it felt like to be useful on her own terms. About the 14, 16 students who came through that door every morning and trusted, without knowing they were trusting, that someone on the other side would take them seriously. She thought about a tin of baking powder in a dry goods store and a man who had apologized and handed it to her without making a production of it. The easy thing at any point would have been to go.
To take the pressure as a verdict and leave Calloway Creek for some other posting, some other town, some other version of this same quiet work. She had done it before. She knew how. But she had stopped moving away from things, somewhere along the way, and started moving toward them instead. Cole pulled up outside and swung down from the saddle. He looked up at the window, saw her, and raised one hand. Not a wave, exactly, just acknowledgement. I see you. I'm here. She raised her hand back. Then she turned from the window, picked up her chalk, and wrote tomorrow's first lesson on the board before the light was gone.